Yeah, you're welcome to our series of lectures on the text and on this channel, Literature So What. So I hope you have subscribed to this channel. Hope you are enjoying it. If you are new to it, please make sure you subscribe to it. Make sure you share it. Make sure you like it. All right. Now, from the last lecture, we were talking about the intricacies of the text, and the text being very, very dynamic and the like. And we've talked about certain things that you need to look at or watch the previous lectures and get, those things we've been talking about for your own particular enjoyment. Now we want to continue from where we stopped. I want to talk today on certain concepts about the text. Now I'm talking about the palimpsest at the moment. Now the palimpsest is a term actually that comes from manuscript studies. In the olden days in Europe, paper was very, very rare. And when it came out, it was very expensive. But before then, scribes were using parchments to write on. They wrote on parchments, and the moment they wrote on these parchments and they had, got what they wanted to write, circulated and all that, and they needed to write some other things, it was expensive to get these parchments for everything they wanted to write anew. So what they did was to erase what they had written before, wash what they had written before, then write what they now want to, get across to their audience on it. But in the course of doing this, there will always be the trace of what they had written initially. The fact that that's particular page is not entirely new, and so they overwrote on that parchment so that this could come up. Now in literary studies, in cultural studies, and in memory studies and studies that have to do with dynamics, that have to do with pluralities of things, a palimpsest is a kind of contraption, a kind of text that has several meanings, that you can come in through several layers of avenues to make its own interpretation. Meaning that a palimpsest suggests that the text has endless meaning. It has to do with layers of refreshed meanings, layers of recycled meanings, and layers of possibilities of even subverting previous things that had been conceived by dominant people that had been interacting with that text. And a palimpsest is not just restricted to literature. For example, let's talk about areas of the palimpsest in literature. For instance, we've talked about the intertext. We have talked about how the intertext tells us about so many things within the domain of the text that gives several meanings. The palimpsest is exactly like that. But it's always a way in which we recall certain voices past in the very text we are dealing with. For example, a palimpsest can show in literature by the style of the author. You could read a particular author and somehow the language or the metaphors or a number of images that come up there reminds you of perhaps some initial write-ups that author had done, or some initial films that filmmaker had made. There are ways in which we recollect, or we are able to link what we are reading now with something that was already produced, but is now being collected, so to speak, on this area of the text. In cultural formations, let's say in material culture, you can design a palimpsest in even cities themselves. For example, it's possible that in a modern city, let's say you are in Oxford, for instance. When you get to Oxford, you will notice that there are certain buildings, especially in the university. There are certain halls, there are certain units of buildings, there are certain colleges that remind you of the past of English architecture, maybe Gothic architecture, Romantic architecture. They transport you back because of the way they look. They are preserved, they are old, and even though around them there are newer buildings and the culture around is new, something about that formation, that culture, that space is a palimpsest, of the past, recurring in the present. So in literary text, films, a number of cultural productions, the palimpsest is a way of recognizing echoes, memories, traces of some past literary, cultural, linguistic, historic events, within the present text we are reading, making the text abundantly, fluid, to several interpretations. Now we come to the metatext. What is a metatext? A metatext is a text, a kind of way in which a text comments on another text, critiques another text, or reveals certain things about itself, critiques certain things about itself, engages itself in a number of ways, making that text self-examining, self-referential, a kind of commentary on maybe its structures, its language, its ideological formations. It allows debates about a text and within the text. Let me give you certain examples. For instance, if we talk about literary criticism or literary theory, definitely talking about certain texts, they focus on, maybe for example, somebody has written a paper on William Shakespeare and really does a lot of work on Macbeth, one of his plays. The writer is not writing Macbeth anew, but the writer is making comments on Macbeth. It's making some critiques on Macbeth, making certain new stories or new insights about Macbeth. That is a form of meta text on Macbeth itself. Then another way of recognizing the metatext is intratext, that is within the text itself. That means that the text, self-examines itself or critiques its mode of formation, structuration, orientations within the meaning-making process of what it is giving the audience. For example, within a text or within a play, we are at a theater and we are watching a play. It's possible that while the play is going on, one of the characters actually comes and walks towards the audience and begins to tell us certain things that will happen or certain things that had happened before what you are viewing came up. That is a meta text. It makes a kind of commentary. It makes a kind of self-referencing. It is critiquing itself and making that text, to be open to more ways of understanding it. A meta text too could be found in a situation where you have series of flashbacks, series of foreshadowings within that text, therefore bringing us to understanding certain things that have been hidden or certain things that have been taken away from our knowledge of what might happen, transporting us faster than the present into the future so that we could make better sense of that text. It is a way of complicating the text in a very, very refined way by which we see how dynamic, how diverse also, the structures, the meaning formations, and so on and so forth within that text is coming into us, okay? And that makes it very interesting. For example, in some plays, you could find out that one of the lead characters come up to the stage to tell us about what had happened. For instance, you have a play that comes up before it is staged. The director comes to the audience, tells us what is about to happen, and then the characters begin to move on the platform and then they are acting. The voice, the director, is telling us who this person is, what this person means to this person, why this person is frowning, why this will happen, and then leaves you to the stage. And within that same play, a character could come up, look at the audience, ask questions. Do you agree with what she has just said? It brings you to a situation in which the audience also participates, becomes part of how the literature is evolving, okay? That is a kind of meta text going on there. Now, we want to talk about the transtext. What is a transtext? A transtext is a text that goes beyond itself. That is, it transcends itself. In the claim of Gerard Ginet, one of the very important theorists that has worked on the text from the area, it's fluid meaning making. He talks about the text. It's a situation in which a text transcends itself. What does that mean? The text A, let's say Aimé Césaire's A Tempest, it's a play on its own, but it's a kind of critique of another play or of a society or of a time, of something that goes beyond what it is actually contained of. It transcends the actual, information, the content of the play itself. It is a way of referencing another text or another reality outside of that play in a form of social criticism or ideological criticism or a kind of historical criticism. For instance, Aimé Césaire's work, A Tempest, is a reworking, a rewriting of William Shakespeare's The Tempest. A Tempest assumption, that is Aimé Césaire's A Tempest, the assumption of A Tempest is that William Shakespeare's The Tempest has colonialist and Eurocentric, ways of looking at the other, that is the non-European, the non-Caucasian characters and identities and cultures represented within The Tempest. For example, characters like Caliban and Sycorax are marginalized, so to speak, in the play text. They are made to be actually absent within the committee of human beings that are composed, so to speak, by more humans that happen to be European, like, Prospero, Miranda, and the like. So that there is a kind of racial dichotomy, there kind of racial segregation, so to speak, within The Tempest. So A Tempest introduces a rewriting of The Tempest, bringing in characters that had not been there before. I mean, at least one of them is brought in, to be a kind of metaphysical engagement, metaphysical interrogation of Ariel, the spirit Ariel that was always, doing the bidding of Prospero. Issue now is beyond the control, so to speak, of Prospero, and then Caliban is also made to speak. Is also made to be active within A Tempest, meaning that A Tempest transcends its particular intra-text, its particular focus of giving us a story by commenting one way or the other, on other events beyond its boundaries. So that is a transtext. So transtextuality often happens. A writer wants to engage what somebody else has written or wants to rework what somebody else has written. A number of such things happen within literature. So that is a transtext. I'm rounding off with what is called the subtext. The subtext is the meaning that is not actually open to the writers within the play, but which makes a deeper and more grave impression on the readers. For example, when we talk about the subtext, the language or what is being said within the text, is just what we hear at the surface. But there is a deeper meaning of that. Let me give you an example of a subtext. For example, somebody annoyed somebody else yesterday by unfairly talking down on their child. Let's say the child of A was unfairly criticized by B yesterday, and then B meets A today. And when B greets cheerfully, B greets A cheerfully, good morning, A answers in a very disturbing way that anybody knowing what happened yesterday would have linked up another meaning to the answer. Well, this one says, B says good morning to A just answers good morning. That good morning is not actually responding to the good morning of B. It is a way of saying you are saying good morning to me after what you have done to my child. Okay? That is a subtext. A subtext is the underlying meaning of what is being said. Somebody is trying to tell you not to do something, and he knows that this thing is not okay, but doesn't want to tell you directly, and you are asking, is that thing okay? Maybe because this other person you are asking has always known that you always seem to want to prove that you want to have your way. The person could say, okay, it's okay. When that person says it's okay, the person is not actually telling you that it is advisable to go. The person is saying, it's not okay, but if you like, have your way. That unsaid meaning is the subtext. That unsaid meaning is the subtext. And we find all kinds of subtext. For example, we can read subtext of colonial discourse within certain literatures knowing that what we are reading is beyond the material surface meaning of what is brought out within the primary text. There can be a gendered interpretation of a text because the subtext to the reader is beyond the initial thing that is being transmitted by that text. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you build up on these lectures and make something very, very interesting out of what you have heard in your further research and all that. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Make sure you engage others to come here and share it. Thank you very much.